Enron employees had 60% of their entire retirement savings in Enron stock. In 2001, the company went to zero, not down 50%, not down 80%, zero. These were real people, accountants, engineers, office managers, who woke up one morning and found out that their entire retirement plan had been wiped out overnight, not because they were reckless, because they trusted one company. And the devastating thing is, it wasn't an accident. It was the math working exactly as it always does. Today I want to show you that math, and why diversification isn't just a nice idea. It is the only mathematically sound way to survive the long game. Here's what we're covering today. First, the volatility math. What actually happens to a single stock versus the index over time. Second, permanent loss. The cases where diversification was the only exit. Third, the math of ruin. Why concentration risk is asymmetric in a way that makes it a fundamentally bad bet. And finally, what the right amount of diversification actually looks like. Let's start with the math that most people have heard quoted, but have never really felt. A typical large-cap individual stock has an annual volatility of around 30 to 35%. The S&P 500, the index that holds 500 companies, has historically had annual volatility of around 15%. That's roughly half. And that gap is not a coincidence or quirk. It is the mathematical consequence of holding one bet versus 500. Think of it this way. Imagine you're crossing a river. You can step on one rock, one company. And if that rock moves, you go in the water. Or you can step across a bridge made of 500 rocks, where if any one of them shifts, you barely feel it. Same river, completely different physics. And here's a number that should completely change how you think about stock picking. Research by Hendrik Bessenbinder at Arizona State tracked every publicly listed U.S. stock from 1926 to 2019. The finding just 4% of stocks accounted for all of the net wealth creation in the entire U.S. market. All of it. The other 96% in aggregate did no better than treasury bills. That means picking a random individual stock is not a 50-50 bet. The odds are structurally stacked against you. The only way to guarantee you're holding those 4% is to hold all of them, which is exactly what an index fund does. But volatility is just the fluctuation. The deeper issue is what happens when the fluctuation doesn't come back. Enron in 2001, down 99%. Lehman Brothers in 2008, down 100%. The company ceased to exist. Nokia, once the most valuable company in Europe, lost 95% of its value from its 2000 peak and never came back. These aren't edge cases. They are a recurring feature of how markets work. And here is the brutal asymmetry. A stock can only fall 100%, but a single company can, and does, go to zero. Permanently. A diversified index of 500 companies has never gone to zero in over a century of recorded history. The worst drawdown the S&P 500 ever had was about 57% in 2008, and then it came back. Think about what the recovery math looks like. If you lose 50%, you need a 100% gain just to get back to even. If you lose 70%, you need 233%. And if you lose 100%, no return in the world gets you back. The math of loss is not symmetric. This is why Warren Buffett's two famous rules of investing both say the same thing. He's not saying you'll never have a down year. He's saying never take a permanent loss. A diversified portfolio can recover from almost anything. A single stock that goes to zero gives you nothing to recover with. But here's where it gets really interesting. And this is the part most investors never think through. I want to show you the actual probability math of what concentration does to your odds. Let's say a given stock has a 10% chance of going to zero, a catastrophic failure, in any given decade. That's actually a pretty optimistic assumption for any single company. Companies fail, industries get disrupted. Now, if you hold just one stock with a 10% ruin probability, your chance of ruin is 10%. Clear enough. Now hold 3 stocks. If they're independent, different sectors, different risks, the chance that all 3 go to zero is 10% times 10% times 10%. That's 0.1%. 1 in 1,000. You've reduced your ruin risk by 99% just by adding 2 more positions. And with an index of 500 companies, your ruin probability approaches something so close to zero it's not worth worrying about. Not because any individual company is safer. They're not. But because the failure of anyone can take the whole portfolio down. This is the mathematical free lunch that Harry Markowitz won the Nobel Prize in Economics for proving in 1952. Markowitz called diversification the only free lunch in finance. And he meant it literally. You get the same expected return as holding individual stocks. In aggregate, markets go up, but with far less risk. You are not giving up return to reduce risk. You are eliminating unnecessary risk for free. Nothing else in investing does that. And the mechanics are fast. Research by Evans and Archer, the classic 1968 study, found that with just 20 to 30 stocks spread across different sectors, you eliminate about 90% of the idiosyncratic risk, the company-specific risk, from your portfolio. The rest, the risk that's left, is market risk, the kind you can't diversify away, which is the only kind you should be paid to take. So if the math is this clear, why do so many people still hold concentrated positions? This is where it gets psychological, and where most investors lose the game before it even starts. The Enron employees weren't stupid. They worked there. They knew the people, they knew the products, they knew the culture. They felt safe, because familiarity feels like an edge. Psychologists call this the familiarity bias. The more you know about something, the more you trust it, even when that trust isn't mathematically justified. The second trap is overconfidence. Studies consistently show that most investors believe they can identify which stocks will outperform. The research says something very different. Professional fund managers, people who do nothing but analyze stocks full-time, underperform a simple index fund in about 80% of cases over a 10-year period. Not because they're bad at their jobs, because the market is genuinely hard to beat. The third and most dangerous trap is employer stock. Surveys consistently find that the average American with a 401k holds about 20% of their retirement in their own company's stock. For some industries, that number is over 50%. You're already economically dependent on your employer, your salary, your health insurance, your career. Adding your retirement savings makes that one company the single point of failure for your entire financial life. And there's the endowment effect. Once you own something, you value it more than if you didn't own it. That inherited block of Apple stock, the tech company where you have options, the stock you've held for 15 years. Selling it feels like a loss, even when holding it is the actual risk. The math doesn't care how long you've held it. It only cares about what happens next. Let's get practical. What does the right amount of diversification actually look like? The short answer is 20 to 30 stocks in genuinely different sectors gets you about 90% of the way there. The key word is uncorrelated. 20 tech stocks is not 20 positions. It's one position with 20 names on it. What you need is exposure to different economic drivers, tech, healthcare, consumer staples, energy, financials, so that not everything moves together. For most people, and I mean most, the simplest and most honest answer is a low-cost index fund. Not because it's exciting, because it guarantees you own the winners, removes the risk of permanent loss from any one company, and costs you almost nothing to hold. The average expense ratio for a total market index fund today is around 3 basis points. That's $3 per year on every $10,000 invested. And the evidence for this is overwhelming. Over the last 20 years, a US total stock market index fund has beaten the median active fund by about 1.5 to 2 percentage points per year. That sounds small, but compounded over 30 years, that difference turns a $400,000 portfolio into over $700,000 just from not paying someone to try to beat a market they almost certainly can't. An important nuance. International diversification matters too. The US makes up about 60% of the global stock market. The other 40%, Europe, Japan, emerging markets, doesn't always move in sync with Wall Street. Adding international exposure removes geographic concentration risk. It's the same principle, one level up. And there is one thing diversification doesn't protect you from, market risk. When the whole market falls, 2008, 2020, 2022, a diversified portfolio falls too. It just falls less, and it always comes back. Concentration doesn't protect you from market risk either. It just adds a second, avoidable risk on top of it. So let's bring it all together. Here's what the math says. 1. A single stock has roughly double the volatility of the index, not because markets are random, but because company-specific risk is real. 2. Permanent loss is asymmetric. You can only lose 100% and there is no recovery from zero. 3. 20 to 30 uncorrelated stocks removes 90% of that company-specific risk for free. 4. The psychological traps, familiarity, overconfidence, employer stock, are the reasons most people ignore the math that would protect them. Those Enron employees weren't unlucky. They were unprotected. The math that would have saved them was available. It has been available since 1952. It requires no expertise, no predictions, no timing the market. It just requires doing something that feels boring, owning a lot of things instead of one. John Bogle, the man who invented the index fund and gave everyday investors access to this math, put it better than anyone. If this made the math of concentration risk finally click for you, follow Market Minute. Next time we're breaking down sequence of returns risk. Why the order in which your returns arrive can matter just as much as the returns themselves. That one surprises everyone. I'll see you there.